DreAllDay.com.
Now tuned in to the show where you learn the discipline to show up day after day, to do the work, the confidence to put yourself out there boldly and authentically, and the mental toughness to continue showing up, doing the work, putting yourself out there, even when the success you expected to achieve has yet to be achieved. And on top of all this, you get a huge dose of personal initiative. What is that? That's the go-getter energy that moves any one of us, including yourself, to go make things happen instead of waiting for things to happen. And then we put all this together into one bundle, one package, one mindset, one method, one approach, one lifestyle, one framework. We wrote a book on the subject. We wrote a bunch of books. We got one book dedicated specifically to this subject, and we had this daily masterclass. And I'm going to give you, yes, you heard me, daily masterclass. I know nobody else does this. There's no one else capable of doing this, but that's why I'm here. And it is all under one umbrella that is called Work on Your Game. My name is Dre Baldwin, also known as Dre All Day. Nice to meet you. Congratulations on being here on the show today. Today's topic is the steel man mentality. The mentality of the steel man. And what the hell does that even mean? I'll explain it. But first, some housekeeping. Let me remind you all that I have a text message line where I want you to send me a text message. Yes, same way you text anybody else. Send me a text message and tell me the best insight you got from today's class. Tell me something you're going to do different or think different based on what you heard here today. Tell me something that I said to you today that really rings out to you. If there's one specific thing you remember from today's masterclass, I want to know what it is. I want to get feedback from my audience. So even if you disagree with something that I said, you can tell me that as well. My text message number is 305-384-6894. Again, 305-384-6894. Send me a text. Tell me the best thing you got from today's class. Now, with all that said, before we get into it, now let's get to it. The steel man mentality. What I mean by this is, first of all, I introduced this whole concept of the steel man when I did a few episodes talking about how to converse with people with whom you disagree. And many of you are probably familiar with the concept of the straw man argument. That's when you take the weakest aspect of someone's argument or some aspect, something that they didn't even say, and then you take something that they said, you change it into something that they didn't say, then you argue against that and then challenge them to defend it when it's not even something that they said. That's a straw man argument. Maybe some of you know some people who are, what do we call it, connoisseurs, let's say, of the straw man argument. They have a habit of using straw man arguments. It's usually a sign of cognitive dissonance when someone's using a straw man argument. They take something that you said, make it sound ridiculous, and then argue against the ridiculous version of something that you didn't even say. And if you use social media often enough, especially platforms like Twitter or Facebook, at least from what I've heard on Facebook, I don't get into back and forth in the comment section on any app, but from what I hear from some people, that's what happens on these apps. Specifically, Facebook is one that became a cesspool of that type of thing. You're probably familiar with the straw man argument, again, even if you never heard it labeled that way. The steel man argument, then, is the inverse of the straw man argument. The steel man is when you take the strongest aspect of another person's point of view, the strongest aspect of their perspective, and then you strategize and try to figure out how can you go against that. Now that is going to cause you to have to sharpen your sword because you're going against the strongest aspect of what that person has. So give me your definition of that steel man mentality. And this is steel man mentality. So it's not just about a back and forth conversation that we're talking about here today. We're talking about the entire mentality around it. And I'm going to take credit for coining this as I haven't heard anybody else talk about it. So the definition I'm going to give you here is instead of taking the weakest element of an adversary, so anything or anyone that you're going up against, instead of looking at the weakest aspect of their presentation, and again, this doesn't have to be just something that they said. This could be something that they do. It could be something that they offer. It could be some way that they present themselves. Instead of looking at the weakest part of their game, again, their argument, their person, their team, what I want you to do instead is take the strongest part of what they do and then you make it stronger. You actually look at it and say, okay, it might even be better than the way it's being presented. So this is the opposite of the straw man, which again, this is what people do when they are looking to attack the weakest aspect of an opponent. And often you see people doing this when they get emotional or they try to get snarky or they just become immature or their immaturity is exposed. They might not become immature, they're already immature, it just gets exposed in the midst of a situation in which they get emotional and snarky. But why would you even want to do this? Why would you want to look at the strongest aspect of an opponent when it would be much easier to attack the weakest aspect of an opponent? I mean, the art of war says you want to go after the enemy where they are weak and avoid them where they are strong. So you might be wondering to yourself, Dre, why would you be telling someone to go after the strongest aspect of what somebody else is doing? Well, I'm going to answer that question in today's masterclass. So let's get right into it. Point number one. Topic, once again, is a steel man mentality. Number one reason why you need to examine and look at and understand the strongest aspect of any opponent you go up against is because it increases your respect for your opponent. You don't ever want to step into a competition, any kind of competition, business, personal, sports. This could be just a conversation, a debate you're having with another person. You don't ever want to step into a competitive situation and not have respect for your opponent. Because when you don't have respect for your opponent, that's when you get beat. It's not necessarily because your opponent is better than you. It's just because you didn't show up mentally focused and sharpened and understanding that your opponent might just be as good at what they do as you think you are at what you do. In the sports world, when we don't respect our opponents, 100% of the time you get beat. Especially, well, at least we'll say, if you're going up against an opponent who can actually play. Now, any sport that you play, you're going up against somebody else who can play, they're going to beat you if you don't respect them. At the professional level of sports, I've said this many times and I will say it many times in the future, so get used to it. When you're going up against people who are at the professional level, anybody can beat anybody on any given day. Now, it doesn't mean they always will beat them, but anybody can be beaten because everybody has the ability to do very well. Now, again, whether people do very well or not depends on many other factors besides just their abilities, but everyone has the ability. Now, at the amateur level, you might be able to get away with not respecting your opponents and win anyway, because at the amateur level, you have people who don't have any business being on the field or on the court or on the track. But at the pro level, every person you see on that field or track or in that ring, they all can play. So if you don't respect your opponent, you won't have a long night. Actually, you won't have a long night. It'll be a short night because you're going to lose very quickly. When someone has the exact opposite position of your opinion, again, we're not talking about sports here, but anything in life, instead of defaulting to thinking that this person, because they have the opposite opinion of you, instead of defaulting to thinking this person must be an idiot who is completely devoid of morals and common sense, here's what I'm going to persuade you to start doing. Assume that this person is just as smart as you are. Assume that maybe they're a little bit smarter than you. So now that you assume that they're smarter than you, ask yourself the question, how do they see things differently from you? I mean, being that they're smarter than you and all, maybe they know some things that you don't know. Maybe they have a perspective that you are not privy to that maybe you need to learn about. Respect the fact that another person who disagrees with you might be able to teach you just a little bit and teach you just as much as you want to teach them. So often when we run into someone who has an opposite opinion from us, our default response is to think that this person is just a dummy, or they're just lost, or they just don't know what they don't know, or they're looking at the information the wrong way. So here's what I'm suggesting that you do. I suggest you do the opposite. Instead of defaulting to thinking that they must be the idiot and you must be the genius, how about we flip it around and maybe you're the idiot and they're the genius. I just want you to play around with that, because from that perspective, now you have humbled yourself enough to the point that maybe that other person has something they can teach you, instead of you thinking you need to teach them. From that perspective, an exchange of ideas and perspectives can occur. You can't exchange ideas with another person if either of you thinks the other one's a complete dummy who just clearly just doesn't have any cells in their brain. But if you respect the fact that they might know something, then you can learn something. The caveat is you need this ability in both people for this exchange to take place. Both you and the other person both have to believe that maybe the other person can teach you something else. Now, if either of you is looking at the other one as if they just must be a complete fool for thinking what they think and showing up thinking what they're thinking, then this will not work, okay? But you, even if the other person thinks you're a dummy, you can still learn by doing this on your own. You can still learn by just learning to ask some good questions. I wrote a book called 25 Conversation Starters. You can get that by going to workonyourgame.com/books. Right there on that page, you can get the leadership bundle. It is 3 books, 25 conversation starters, 25 reasons to quit worrying, and 55 daily people skills. Again, that's at workonyourgame.com. And you can learn from another person just by humbling yourself to the point and just wondering, maybe they know something that you don't know. It might only be one thing, it might be 1,000 things, but there may be something. But you have to steel man their position and believe that they might know something. All right, don't think that they're a complete imbecile. Point number 2. Today's topic, once again, is a steel man mentality. When you are facing a challenge, look at the strongest aspect of the challenge that you're facing first, then find the weakest point last. I'm not telling you not to find the weakest point. If you're facing a challenge, you probably want to get an easy victory. You want to make it as quick and as bloodless as possible, and I agree with that. However, I still want you to look for the strongest point of that challenge that you're facing. Why is this? Because sometimes in life, you might not be able to win just by going after the weakest aspect of an opponent, because many times your opponent might know what their weakest aspect is just as easily as you'll be able to identify their weakest aspect. As I told you, in the professional world, I told you about this in an episode where I talked about the third day in sports and the third day in business. Your opponents have scouted you the same way that you're scouting them. And they often, if they're any good, they've scouted themselves. In episode 1902, I told you about handling the third day in sports as an athlete. And what do? When you're an athlete at the professional level, everyone has scouted you. Everyone has looked at your game. They know exactly what you do. They know exactly what you can do and what you can't do, what you're good at and what you're bad at. So they know your weakest point. And assuming that you have scouts on your team, they have probably told you what your weakest point is so that you know what the opponent knows. So that you can it's kind of like this game of chess that starts to happen. So you need to know the weakest point of your opponent, but at the same time, understand your opponent probably knows it, and they're going to try to stop you from getting to that weakest point. So you also need to respect their strongest point, because their strongest point is what they're going to be trying to use to beat you. So you should probably know where it's coming from. All right, watch for the hook, as they say. So when you chop off the head of your opponent, i.e., their strongest attribute, the rest of the body will fall with it. While you may not be able to chop off the head all the time, because of course your opponent is going to try to stop you from doing that, even engaging in the exercise of looking for their strongest aspect, their strongest attribute, will make you stronger and make you think more strategically about how you can win. Instead of just saying, oh, I'm going to win because I'll just go after this weak aspect of my opponent and I'll beat them. It'll be easy peasy. This will happen in 5 minutes. But what if that doesn't work? Then what are you going to do? You have contingency plans just in case your perfectly laid plan does not work. Often, many people do not. Their perfectly laid plan is, okay, all I'm going to do is just this, this, and this, and the rest of the world is just going to lay down and comply with everything that I want to happen, and everything's going to work perfect. And then when you go out into the real world, and the real world alters your lab test of everything going perfect, many people are left stuck in the mud, not knowing what the hell to do, because the rest of the world did not adhere to your plans. The rest of the world did not comply with your plans. So this is why you need to do the exercise of engaging and asking yourself, all right, what if my plans don't work perfectly? What am I going to do then? This will make you more stronger mentally, and it'll make you think more, again, strategically about how you can win. Usually you're going to need a strategy to beat somebody who's good, because they're not just going to fall down and lay down and let you beat them at their weakest point. They're going to be attacking you the same way you're attacking them. Maybe it may even force you to work on your own game, because you'll realize when you look at the strongest aspect of your opponent, you'll realize that your current game is not good enough to beat them. And you might realize, like, damn, I need to do a little bit of work here, because if I just show up with what I have, I'm not going to win. You can always come back to the weak points of your opponent if you see an opening for it, the Achilles heel of your opponent, so to speak, later on. It is the weakest point after all, but understand that their strongest point, when you identify what it is and you pay attention to it, that will focus you and it will remind you that you can be beaten. This is one thing that every competitor needs to keep in mind at all times, is that you can be beaten. If you're a war general and you just won a war and you're coming home to celebration and everyone's bowing at your feet, doesn't mean you can't get killed in the next one. All right, doesn't mean there might be some dissenter in the crowd who might pull out a gun and shoot you while you're going through your parade and celebration. Do not think that you can't be beaten just because you won the last fight. All right, you could lose the very next one. So this is why you need to have this steel man mentality, that even though you have won, that's when you win, that's the time when it's most important that you tighten up your chin strap, tighten up your bootstraps, tighten up everything that you're doing when you have won. It's the moment of victory, is the moment of greatest peril often in life, because we get so high on ourselves and we start thinking that we must be invincible, we must be just perfect because we just won. But it's those moments and when we get beaten, because we let our guard down, we relax, and we start thinking that it all must be because of our inherent genius. There's a moment of defeat actually when we're least at danger, because in the moment of defeat, what we start doing is we start thinking, where did I go wrong? Where was I unprepared? What did I not know that I should have known ahead of time? Where did I not get my game ready? Where do I need to improve my game? We usually think about those things when we get our asses kicked. But when we win, we just think, well, we must be perfect. So this is why the steel man mentality is really a discipline, and it'll make you more mentally tough and keep you focused even when you are creating success. Point number 3, today's topic once again is the steel man mentality. Now, as I just touched on, this third point, don't get too high on yourself. The great thing about the steel man mentality is that because it focuses you to always look at the strength of your opposition and see it even better than it is, was me seeing it as maybe it is concealing something that you haven't even seen yet. It keeps you on point, it keeps you focused, it keeps you on your toes, and it reminds you that yes, you can be beaten by this opponent if you don't show up all the way and you're not 100% prepared. It keeps your mind from going soft and keeps you from getting too self-satisfied because you are constantly looking at the strongest version of your opponent, which you have mentally created in your mind. What happens with a lot of people when they create success in life is that we allow our minds to get soft, we relax, we stop working as hard, we don't show up as early, we leave a little, we don't show up as early as we used to, we don't stay as late as we used to, we are not as hungry as we were before because now we're eating good, sometimes literally eating good. And this causes us to slack off just a little bit. And it's just that little bit of, it's that little bit of edge that we lose that becomes a little bit more, it's not as sharp as it was, it becomes a little bit more blunt. Now we come across somebody who hasn't won yet, somebody who hasn't tasted success the way that we have yet. They're a little bit sharper, a little bit more focused. The skill levels may be equal, but because their focus is higher, they win. And this happens all the time. If you look at sports, in the sports world is a great example. Why is it so hard for many teams to repeat as champions? At least when they keep their teams together, it's hard for a team to repeat as a champion when they have the exact same players from the previous championship team, because those players got satisfied. All right, we just won. All right, we already tasted the success. They already got their bonuses. They already got their rings. They already did the celebration. They did the parade. Everyone told them how great they were. All right, are you going to be as hungry the next time around after all of that just happened, after you just went through all of that? For most people, 99.9% of the time, the answer is no. And mind you, you're going up against a whole bunch of other people who haven't tasted the success. They all watched you win, and now they're that much hungrier, not only to win, but to beat you because you're the one who has the target on your back. So this is why it's so hard for professional sports, for teams or players to repeat as champions, because they have the target on their back, number one. Nobody else has tasted the success like they did the last time around, number two. And number three, they have been sitting around being pampered based on their success from the previous time around. So that's why it requires a superb, amazing effort, amazing level rather, of mental focus to stay that focused to keep succeeding after you have already reached success. So you look at someone like, in the last, let's just say the last 30 years, when I'm thinking of sports, at least the sport that I watch the most, basketball, Michael Jordan's Chicago Bulls team, this is why it was so amazing the feat that they did, because twice they won championships 3 times in a row with pretty much the same team, 2 different times. They had 2 different sets of guys, 2 main guys, Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen, and the coach Phil Jackson. But the first 3-peat and the second 3-peat was pretty much the same group of guys in each of those sets of 3. Now there was a team, the Golden State Warriors, they won a bunch of championships over years recently here, but they added a big piece, and they added somebody like Kevin Durant, who hadn't won a championship yet, and he helped them win that championship, and that was 2017 and then in 2018. But it's been hard for any team to repeat since then, simply because it's hard to stay that sharp. It's hard to stay that hungry. It's hard to stay that focused year after year when you've already had the success and you've already won. Now, there are athletes in other sports, people like Roger Federer in tennis, or someone like Pete Sampras before him, or Novak Djokovic in tennis. These guys have been able to create success over and over again. Serena Williams, another one in tennis. Tiger Woods in golf, when he was in his prime doing his thing. Been able to create that success over and over and over again, even though they had already tasted the success. How do you stay that mentally sharp? It requires a complete focus. It requires total focus on what you're doing and not letting yourself go off the rails and enjoy the fruits of your labor. Really, you really had to just keep working as if you don't already had a success. To stay on point and focus. It is hard to do. It's why I can name these people. It's not so many that can do it. And there are others in other sports who I don't know about, of course. But the steel man mentality, and again, I'm taking credit for creating this. So when you talk about this, make sure you credit me. This is your protection against self-righteousness. In the process of seeing the best version of your opponent's strongest points, you will learn new things, you will change your mind on some things, and you will see that your point of view probably has some holes in it. That maybe the way that you showed up might not quite be enough for you to create success and sustain that success, which is going to force you to keep working on your game. Let's recap today's class, which is the steel man mentality, defined as, instead of taking the weakest element of an adversary or a challenge, Look at the strongest element, make it even stronger in your mind, and figure out how you would go against that, because that is really going to force you to keep working. Number one, respect your opponent. In sports, when we don't respect our opponents, you get beaten. If you're in a combat sport and you don't respect your opponent, you will get put to sleep, as they say. Everyone knows what that means. When someone has the exact opposite position of your position, instead of defaulting to thinking that they're just a dummy, how about maybe you're the dummy and they're the smart one? What could you possibly learn from that person? When you put yourself in that frame of mind, now your mind is actually open to learning. And you can use this in any aspect. You can use it in business, you can use it in sports, use it in relationships, use it in conversation. Number two, when facing a challenge, look at the strongest point first, look at his weakest point later. Why? Because you can always come back to the weakest point. But when you chop off the head, the strongest aspect of any challenge, the rest of the body will automatically fall with it. So when you're looking at the strongest point of a challenge, maybe it'll force you to work on your own game, because you realize that your current game might not be as good as you thought it was. Number three, don't get too high on yourself. The great thing about the steel man mentality is that you're always looking at the strengths of your opponent and seeing it even stronger than it is. That keeps you focused and on point and keeps you working, so that you do not allow your mind or your game or your skills to get soft. The steel man mentality is your protection against self-righteousness. In the process of seeing the best version of your opponent's points, you learn new things, you'll change your mind, you'll see that maybe your perspective and your approach might not be as great as you thought it was. Send me a text and tell me the best insight you got from today's class. My number is 305-384-6894. If anyone out there is looking for someone who can help hold you accountable and help you with this steel man mentality so that you can stay focused, you can stay on point, and stay bringing your best game even after you've created the success, then you might be a good candidate for my 3rd-day mastermind, which is the only place where I'm offering direct coaching straight from me, straight to you, to keep you on point focused. This is personal development, professional development, accountability. Wherever you're looking to go, reach out to me. We can set up a call, find out if I can help you get from where you're at to where you want to go. You can do that by going to workonyourgameuniversity.com. Just click the button to sign up for a call, and we'll talk about what we need to talk about. Work on your game. Dre all day.